If you were trapped in Tokyo while an enormous nuclear-powered mutant reptile was destroying the entire city, what would you do? When a freakish radioactive monster emerges from the waters off of the coast of Japan, nothing that the military throws at it can stand in its way, and that's before it starts taking down entire skyscrapers with a concentrated beam of atomic energy. We're here to break down the mistakes made, what you should do, and how to beat evolving Godzilla in Shin Godzilla. This ordinary afternoon is about to turn into an absolute bloodbath. In the Tokyo Bay, the Japanese Coast Guard are called in to investigate a yacht that appears to have been abandoned. There's no trace of the owner or signs of foul play, other than an envelope containing a few personal documents. Moments later, the boat begins violently shaking until it's suddenly destroyed in a massive geyser. The tidal wave continues until it's over a nearby tunnel, terrifying the drivers as it starts to fill with a mix of water and blood. These are bad enough signs already, but they have no way of knowing that a colossal reptilian creature is about to go on a rampage of death and destruction, the likes of which they could never imagine. While emergency responders evacuate the tunnel, a team of government officials gathers to discuss what could have caused the incident. Their best guess is that it must have been an earthquake, or possibly a volcanic eruption on the bay's floor, but something about the explanations isn't lining up. Just then, loud crashing can be heard in the tunnel, and a video begins going around online of a massive tail emerging from the water. The Prime Minister arrives along with high-ranking members of the military, and they continue to argue with the other officials about what's really behind the destruction. The majority want to run with the idea that it was an eruption or a hydrothermal vent, but the scientists directly contradict those explanations. And that's when this guy, Yaguchi, speaks up about the enormous creature from the video. Of course, the rest of the officials refuse to believe that this could even be possible, but before the day is over, they're going to wish that they had just taken Yaguchi here more seriously when they had the chance. Okay, things look pretty bad already, but in just a matter of days, this city is about to be completely destroyed. We already know that there's more going on here than just an earthquake or a volcanic eruption, but based on the evidence that they have right now, I'd probably have to side with the Prime Minister and his lackeys at this point. To better understand why, I think that we should quickly brush up on some geology. But don't worry, we'll get to the giant lizard fighting tanks part of the story soon. So the Earth's crust is actually made up of several large floating chunks called tectonic plates. Although we can't normally feel it, these plates are constantly shifting, and sometimes they smash right into each other. The area where two plates collide is called a fault line, and that's how earthquakes are made. Because of its position at a junction between four tectonic plates, Japan is actually the most at-risk country in the developed world when it comes to earthquakes and other natural disasters. The island of Honshu, where Tokyo is located, sits directly on top of the Japan Median Tectonic Line, the country's largest fault system. In any given year, Japan can experience as many as 1,500 earthquakes. That's 4 earthquakes per day. Of course, most of them are so weak that you wouldn't even notice it happening unless you were looking at a seismograph. But some, like the 2011 Great East Japan earthquake, which took the lives of over 15,000 citizens and caused the Fukushima nuclear power plant disaster, can be incredibly destructive. To make matters even worse, Japan also sits on top of the Pacific Ring of Fire and is home to an insane 10% of the entire world's active volcanoes. So when these guys immediately jump to the conclusion that what's been causing the chaos must be an earthquake or volcanic eruption, it's safe to say that they have a pretty damn good reason for it. Pretty soon, they're gonna realize that my man Yaguchi here wasn't just blowing smoke, but the most responsible thing that the government can do at this time is to work with what they know, at least for now. Things are gonna get crazy pretty fast, so as a civilian on the ground, it's important that you understand what to do. In an earthquake, if you're inside, then you should immediately drop down to your hands and knees, seek shelter under a sturdy table or desk if possible, and hold on tight until the shaking stops. You'll want to stay away from any glass or large pieces of furniture that might topple over, because most earthquake-related deaths actually come from falling objects. If the building that you're in takes damage, then you need to get out as quickly as possible once the quake is over. But remember, never to use the elevators, as you may end up trapped by a power outage or an aftershock. If you're caught outside then, you need to quickly move away from any buildings or utility wires and get to a safe open area as soon as possible. For earthquakes that happen near the shore, like here in Tokyo, there's also a significant risk of a tsunami occurring. If the shaking lasts for more than 20 seconds, then you need to quickly move inland about 2 miles, or to an elevation point that's at least 100 feet above sea level. Start moving right away, and don't wait for an official announcement. The roads will most likely be heavily congested, so don't try to use a car. Go on foot or by bike instead. Volcanic eruptions, on the other hand, are a whole different ballgame. There may be lava flow headed your way, so get the hell out of there or make it to high ground as soon as possible. If you're stuck inside, then be sure to close all of your windows and doors and turn off any fans, heating, or air conditioning to avoid being exposed to toxic fumes. If you're outside, then you could be in danger from falling ash, so do what you can to get inside or to higher ground immediately. These are some useful tips in case you're ever caught in the middle of one of these natural disasters, but as for these guys, nothing could prepare them for what's about to happen next. The officials return to the conference room and begin evaluating how successful their response has been so far. As it stands, they seem to have the situation well under control, but that's when the Prime Minister gets an urgent update from one of his aides. Abruptly stopping the meeting, they switch over to footage from the local news, and everyone can't believe what they're seeing. On the screen, there appears to be a giant tail that's as tall as a building sticking up out of the water, proving without a doubt that Yaguchi here has actually been right all along. One of the higher-ranking officials quickly starts throwing out ideas, suggesting that they could simply do nothing and let the creature go back into the ocean, try to capture it, kill it, or attempt to scare it away. Most of them immediately vote to go on the offensive, but the Minister of Defense is concerned about the potential for civilian casualties and collateral damage, and the academic community wants to capture it alive so that it can be studied. While they've been dragging their feet, the creature has been traveling further and further upriver into occupied areas of the city, leaving a trail of unbelievable destruction in its wake. As it runs out of water and begins making its way through the streets, we get our first real glimpse at the monster. The creature looks more like a giant chicken without any feathers than anything that should be coming out of the ocean, and slithers its hulking body along the ground as blood pours out of its gills. It's absolutely terrifying, and the civilians run away in a total panic. But what they don't know yet is that this is only the creature's second form. Okay, despite what the government's trying to tell them, it's pretty obvious that everyone in this situation is totally out of control, and nobody has any idea what to do about it. Based on their response so far, they're not stopping this creature anytime soon, but they need to act quickly before the destruction gets even worse. With no sign of this thing slowing down, civilians on the ground should make it a priority to immediately evacuate the area and get out of its path as fast as they possibly can. They'll be squashed like a pancake if they're caught between it and wherever it's trying to go, but the good news is that it doesn't seem to be interested in the people at all, and moves more or less in a completely straight line, so as long as they can avoid ending up in its way, then they should be able to live to see tomorrow. According to their reports, the creature is only traveling at about 13 miles per hour, which is pretty slow all things considered, but unfortunately faster than the average person can run, especially for extended periods of time. This means that they need to be strategic about what direction that they choose to escape, and I'd suggest immediately running west. This would put you perpendicular to the creature's path and keep you away from the water, where it's most likely going to retreat back to once the damage is done. Because it's traveling at such a low speed, escaping by car should be easy, but the streets are going to be gridlocked with other people who had the same idea. Before you know it, traffic is going to be too bad to move an inch, which means that their only other option is to escape on foot. If they can find one, then it's time to get on a bike and start pedaling like their lives depended on it. Bonus points go to anyone who has a motorcycle or even an electric scooter, because they'll be able to zip right through the crowded streets and quickly make it to safety. What makes things even more complicated is that the military is concerned about civilian casualties and doesn't want to engage the creature with heavy weapons just yet. This is fair enough, but they still need to act quickly before even more innocent bystanders end up dead anyway. so they have to think of a way to fight back that doesn't involve the liberal use of high explosives. In order to defeat your enemy, the key is to understand their weaknesses, but we don't know much of anything about this creature right now. All that we really have to go off of is how it looks, which is pretty much like some kind of mutant T-Rex from the bottom of the ocean, but at least that gives us a place to start. In its day, some of T-Rex's most formidable enemies were other dinosaurs like Triceratops and Ankylosaurus. The closest animals that we have to them nowadays in terms of their size and fighting ability are probably elephants and rhinos from the Tokyo Zoo. But, unfortunately, it's really not even close, and good luck getting them to fight this thing. So going full Jumanji on this monstrosity isn't going to work, but what else have we got? Well, how about some heavy construction equipment instead? Maybe someone could get an industrial-sized forklift and ram it full speed into one of its big googly eyes, or slam it in the head with a 12,000-pound wrecking ball. It's a better idea than nothing, but when you think about how big this creature is, this probably isn't going to work out either. The T-Rex was only about 40 feet long, and this thing is almost 400. Anyone who gets within melee range is going to end up getting so absolutely flattened that it's going to take one brave Bob the Builder to fix this show. Right now, it seems like nothing short of military intervention is going to stop this creature, but to avoid any civilian casualties, they'll need to use non-lethal methods. It could be possible to overwhelm its senses with a barrage of tear gas or somehow stun it with a massive amount of electricity. There are also two more advanced types of non-lethal crowd control weapons that the Japanese military might have access to. The first is ADS, or Active Denial System, a direct energy weapon that hits the target with a powerful heat ray. That's not enough to kill them, but makes it feel like your skin is on fire, which, as you can imagine, is extremely unpleasant. Another option is LRAD, or Long-Range Acoustic Device, which produces an unbearably loud noise to drive a target away without killing them, although they'll probably rupture an eardrum or two in the process. Any of these might work to drive the creature back into the water, but if it doesn't work out, then they may need to get more creative. Deep sea creatures die when brought to the surface due to the gas inside their bodies expanding from the reduced atmospheric pressure. So, if they could somehow inject the monster with massive amounts of nitrogen, then it might explode. The cleanup would be nasty for sure, but it would be better than having to rebuild the entire city. If all else fails, put a bayonet on the end of a military drone and fly it straight into the thing's head. Whatever they choose to do, it's crucial that they act fast, because they're about to find out that the creature only gets more powerful the more that it adapts. Nothing seems to affect the creature's progress, and it's able to crush entire buildings without so much as slowing down, and could reach the center of the city in just a few hours. While the government scrambles to figure out their response, civilians are forced to evacuate the area on foot as the roads become completely jammed with traffic. Many of the officials want to send in the military, but are hesitant that doing so will only make the situation worse. Only the Prime Minister can make the final choice, and after carefully weighing the options, he decides to activate the Japanese self-defense forces to deal with the creature. While ground troops oversee the evacuation, a unit of attack helicopters are sent to exterminate the monster, but military officials warn the Prime Minister that due to the size of the affected area, many elderly and sick people may not be able to make it out in time. Although his co-workers think that this will be over in no time, Yaguchi here cautions them not to be so confident. The evacuation continues, and emergency responders begin to panic as they're quickly overwhelmed. Just then, for no apparent reason, the creature slams its body into the ground, coming to a dead stop. At first, the officials think that this could be the end, but they have no idea just how wrong that they really are. Suddenly, the creature begins to evolve, increasing in size, growing a pair of arms, and now standing upright on its hind legs. Reaching its third form, it bellows a tremendous roar that can be heard for miles around, and presses on through the streets towards the center of the city, destroying anything that stands in its path. When the helicopters arrive, they are shocked to see that the creature has changed. They're about to open fire, but at the last moment, they notice that civilians are still in the area, and the Prime Minister orders them to pull back. All of a sudden, the creature begins to overheat and makes an abrupt turn, quickly retreating back towards the water and disappearing into the Tokyo Bay. Okay, they've survived for now, no thanks to the military, but since the creature's still alive, they need to be prepared in case it ever comes back. Now, the creature wouldn't have just walked out onto land for no particular reason. It must want something, and they need to figure out what its ultimate goal is. It's possible that the creature is trying to migrate, and in the natural world, animals do this for one of three primary reasons: either to find new sources of food, change their habitat, or to reproduce. In terms of food, the ocean should be a much more abundant source of prey for something of this size. Unless, of course, it's planning on eating humans, but so far it hasn't really shown any interest in doing that. In fact, it doesn't seem to be eating anything at all. So ruling that out, next we have the need to change its habitat. Again, a creature of this size seems like it would be much more comfortable in the open ocean than here on land. However, it's grown legs to walk bipedally and lost its gills, which would indicate that it most likely wants to stay. There's no signs of how this thing reproduces just yet, but if it's coming on land to spawn a bunch of Godzilla babies, then that's some really bad news, and they need to get ahead of this fast before the entire country is destroyed. But what can they do to prepare? While it's still in the bay, the Japanese Navy should go after it with ships and submarines, since they'll be able to engage without the risk of civilian casualties. And it gives them a chance to go on the offensive before the creature is back on land. While the Navy is working on that, ground troops should set up defensive lines along the coast where they think that it's most likely to show up again. They should also get all the civilians out of the area. That way, they can react with an immediate military response the next time that it shows up. Personally, I wouldn't be waiting for instructions, and I would be packing my bags and moving as far away from the water as possible before it came back for round 2. Now, in case conventional weapons aren't enough to do the job, then they could try digging massive trenches in strategic areas along the coast, getting it to fall in and then burying it alive. Of course, the trenches would have to be as deep as an entire apartment building, so they're probably going to have to commit a few OSHA violations on this one. But when Godzilla shows up, you gotta do what you gotta do to survive. In the days following the incident, life goes on as normal within the city, and the citizens and government try to rebuild what they can. With casualties in the hundreds and entire city blocks lying in total ruin, there's no denying that the government's slowness to act came with a heavy price. The military begins marking important sites and preparing ground troops for the possibility of another attack. Despite ongoing searches, the creature itself is nowhere to be found, but it won't be long before it rises up from the bay once again. In the meantime, Yaguchi is appointed as the head of a special task force that's focused on researching the creature. He gathers a team of government suits, biology experts, public works officials, and military personnel, encouraging them to forget about the chain of command and freely speak their minds. One of the biologists points out that the creature has already evolved 3 times, which means that a 4th mutation is most likely on the way. They're working on analyzing a blood sample, but the United States is already beginning to interfere, taking most of the samples for themselves and putting pressure on them to figure this out. Although the creature hasn't done anything besides walk around with seemingly no goal, they can't yet come to any conclusions about its intelligence. Something that size requires an enormous amount of energy to even exist, and Hiromi here suggests that it could be powered by nuclear fission. The others only laugh her off, saying that this would be impossible, but soon they'll be eating their words for a second time. Just then, radiation alarms begin to go off in parts of the city near the mouth of the bay, although no reactor leaks have been detected anywhere in the country. That's when one of the investigators makes a shocking discovery. A map of compiled data shows radiation spikes that line up exactly with the creature's path, proving that Hiromi was right. The creature is nuclear powered. For now though, the government officials don't want to say anything to the public, afraid that jumping the gun on evacuations will cause unnecessary panic. Okay, they've just learned some crucial information. It turns out that the creature gets its energy from nuclear fission, which explains why it hasn't been consuming people. From what they've just discovered, it seems like the creature is essentially a walking nuclear power plant. Nuclear reactors are fueled by uranium through a process called nuclear fission. When a uranium atom splits apart, it releases neutrons that collide with other atoms, causing a chain reaction, which produces heat. In a nuclear reactor, pellets of enriched uranium are stacked into long tubes called fuel rods. and a chain reaction is intentionally induced. To safely manage the rate of reaction, neutron-absorbing rods made of cadmium called control rods are moved into the spaces among the fuel. In the case of an emergency, the control rods are pushed all the way into the reactor, causing it to completely shut down, which is called a scram. If this thing is looking to feed on nuclear energy, then it could be heading for the Fukushima disaster site north of Tokyo. Although you'd think that it would be better to get there via the ocean instead of trekking it over land. Regardless, without any other indication of what the creature wants, this is probably their best guess as its goal for now. So I'd set up a battle plan with that in mind, and station troops along the most likely path that it would take to reach Fukushima. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I'm no nuclear physicist and learned all of this from YouTube and Wikipedia. But with that being said, knowing how the creature gets its energy might give us the answer for how to stop it. If they could somehow find a way to force feed it a massive amount of cadmium, then they might be able to cause it to scram, shutting down its internal nuclear reactor and killing the creature from the inside. It's a long shot, but it's the best idea that I can come up with, and by the time that this nuclear abomination shows back up, they're gonna realize that good old-fashioned firepower isn't enough to do the trick. Meanwhile, this woman Kyoko, a special envoy sent by the US president, requests a private meeting with Yaguchi. She needs him to look into a man named Goro Maki, a disgraced former professor of zoology, whose research may have predicted the creature's appearance. In exchange, the US will supply them with any intel that they've gathered on the creature, but for now, she asks that they keep this quiet from the rest of the international community. After calling in a favor from his friends at the National Police Agency, Yaguchi is quickly able to find the man's last known location. It turns out that the abandoned boat belonged to him, and although Maki himself is missing, they did manage to recover his envelope of personal documents. This is exactly what Kyoko was looking for, and she holds up her end of the deal, giving Yaguchi a folder detailing everything that the US has been able to figure out. They've even given the creature a name based off Maki's work, calling it Godzilla. While they continue to work on the solution, Yaguchi hires a freelance journalist to dig up whatever he can on the former professor. From the US reports, they gather that the creature had been feeding off of illegally dumped radioactive material in the bay, giving it the power to aggressively mutate. Maki had been studying the creature and left behind several pages of coded notes about its origins for them to decipher. Lab analysts of the samples from the disaster site reveal that Godzilla's body is home to a new energy-producing element, unlike anything they've ever seen before, which explains why the US is so interested. The creature has 8 times the DNA of humans, easily making it the most highly evolved species on the planet. At this rate, they're not sure if it's even possible to kill it, but that's when this biologist comes up with a plan. From what he can gather, Godzilla is essentially a giant nuclear reactor with its blood working as a cooling system. This means that they may be able to freeze it in place by introducing massive amounts of coagulant into its bloodstream. Although it may not kill the creature, it should be enough to immobilize it, and they decide to bring the idea before the Prime Minister where they can begin gathering up the necessary materials. While Yaguchi and his team are working around the clock to put their plan into action, Godzilla suddenly resurfaces in the Sagami Bay and begins marching back towards the shore. As the panicked civilians run for their lives, government officials scramble into another emergency meeting where they start to organize their response. They quickly realize that the creature has changed, developing a different appearance and doubling from its original size. This is its 4th form, and it's the most horrifying evolution yet. Although it shows no interest in the frightened crowds, it seems to be moving with purpose directly towards the heart of the city. It's destroying everything in its path, and could reach Tokyo in just under 3 hours. Okay, it looks like Barney's radioactive cousin here is back to finish the job, and they're barely any more prepared than they were the first time around. There's really only one person to blame for what's about to happen, and it's the man who used to be at the top of the food chain before Godzilla came down. Mr. Prime Minister, you f***ed up! Although it may not have changed the outcome much, you seriously dropped the ball by refusing to listen to one guy who tried to tell you exactly what was going on from the very beginning. Just by being terminally online, Yaguchi here spotted Godzilla coming before it ever made it to landfall, but you just couldn't believe that it was possible until the giant creature was practically standing in your front yard. He doesn't seem so crazy anymore now, does he? Instead, you spent your time giving the unsuspecting public false information. And who knows how many casualties could have been avoided if they'd had a proper heads up. The key was to strike early before the situation became even more dangerous. But you were so caught up in red tape that you ended up doing nothing at all. Seriously, how many different meetings did you need to have? The citizens of Tokyo would have been better off if you just immediately gotten on the news and shouted, "Everyone run for your lives." But you dragged your feet on the whole thing, and now countless people ended up dead because of it. Even with plenty of warning this time around, you did almost nothing to prepare for the next attack. And now Godzilla is back, looking more jacked than ever, while you're still scrambling to evacuate civilians so that you can properly respond. In fact, at this point, it seems like the only way that you'd be useful to anyone else is by volunteering yourself as a meat shield. Things are about to get more worse than you could ever imagine, and it won't be long before your career comes crashing to an end. I hope they pick a better replacement when it's all over, because Prime Minister Akochi, you f***ed up! Military officials warn that physically damaging Godzilla's body could contaminate the city with radioactive material, but a lack of action on their part will be seen as a sign of weakness by the international community, making it critical to eliminate the threat as soon as possible. With Yaguchi's plan still not ready, the Prime Minister gives the orders for the self-defense force to bring the creature down by any means necessary. And this time, the military isn't holding back. They immediately scramble fighter jets, attack helicopters, tanks, artillery, and ground units, throwing everything they have at Godzilla to stop it before it reaches Tokyo. Leadership orders the fighting troops to focus their fire on the creature's head and legs, and as soon as they're sure that the area has been completely evacuated, the battle begins. The choppers surround Godzilla and open fire on its head with their autocannons, but all 16,000 rounds bounce off without leaving so much as a scratch. With authorization from the Prime Minister, they decide that it's time to up the firepower, striking the creature with dozens upon dozens of Hydra rockets and Hellfire missiles. Nothing should be left standing after this kind of barrage, but to their horror, the attack shows no signs of having any effect. Terrified, military leadership activates Phase 2 of the plan. From across the river, every tank in the country begins firing on Godzilla's legs, hitting it with hundreds of armor-piercing rounds, while at the same time, howitzer and missile launcher teams rain down fire directly onto the creature's head. Although Godzilla is still standing, this time, they've at least managed to slow the creature down. The tanks pull back just as a team of fighter jets swoops in and hits Godzilla with several guided bombs, causing a blast that can be felt all the way back to the command post. The strike causes Godzilla to change direction, but what they think is a sign of their attacks working is really the exact opposite. From out of the smoke, the creature picks up a huge section of a bridge and tosses it across the river, burying the command post and crushing any tanks that weren't quick enough to escape. With that, Godzilla crosses the river and makes its way into Tokyo. It's still within range of artillery, but these areas of the city haven't been evacuated yet, forcing the Prime Minister to temporarily call off the attack. Now the US military decides that it's time to step up, sending in a team of B-2 stealth bombers to finish the job. The citizens quickly take cover in the city's underground bomb shelters to avoid the destruction, and even government officials are required to evacuate from their command center. While the Prime Minister escapes in a helicopter, Yaguchi and his team have to flee through the streets on foot, where they get their first look at the enormous creature that they've been fighting. At the same moment, the US bombers strike ahead of schedule, hitting the target with two 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs. To everyone's surprise, the strike is effective, and Godzilla starts to bleed for the first time. Thinking that they have it on the ropes, the bombers circle back for another run, but that's when Godzilla shows them what it's really capable of. Lifting up its head, Godzilla roars into the night sky as its entire back begins to glow neon purple. The creature then bends forward and opens its mouth, releasing a cloud of flammable gas into the city's streets, before unleashing a burst of flames that incinerates everything for miles around. The destruction is unbelievable, but it's nothing compared to what happens next. As Godzilla's power continues to grow, its flaming breath transforms into a piercing beam of concentrated atomic energy, vaporizing one of the bombers in mid-flight. The remaining two planes circle around to drop their payload, but Godzilla fires a protective burst of energy from within its back, destroying them both as well. Enraged by the attack, it sweeps through the skyline with its atomic beams, slicing entire skyscrapers in half, and taking down the Prime Minister's evacuation chopper in the process, killing everyone on board. The entire city is left in a heap of smoldering rubble, but having used up all of its energy, Godzilla suddenly freezes in place, becoming dormant. To the survivors, it looks like the attack is finally over for now. Okay, this is not good. They've thrown just about everything short of a nuke at this monstrosity, but nothing seems to work. Even the bunker busters hardly made a dent and only seemed to piss Godzilla off even more. It's time for the self-defense force to dig deeper into their arsenal for any top-secret weapons that they might be holding back, before the US decides to glass the entire land. After this battle, Godzilla here has just evolved a way to shoot down incoming projectiles before they even come close. This means that bombs and missiles are going to be useless unless he's out of energy. While Godzilla's in its dormant state, they could try dropping more bunker busters onto it to see what happens. But the moment that it wakes up again, that idea won't be any good. It could be time to fight lasers with more lasers. Since laser weapons use light, this means that there would be no projectile for Godzilla to shoot down, and they just might be able to roast this giant iguana once and for all. It worked for Mechagodzilla, so maybe it could be worth a try? A railgun is a theoretical type of weapon that uses an electromagnetic force to launch projectiles at an extremely high velocity, while our most advanced explosive-powered weapons can only get a projectile to a velocity of about 2 kilometers per second. A railgun can get things moving at almost double that rate, and the destructive force that they generate is enormous. With any luck, a projectile fired from a railgun might be traveling so fast that Godzilla wouldn't be able to intercept it, unlike the missiles that he's easily able to take down. Instead of a nuke, they might be able to drop an old satellite or a heavy piece of space junk onto Godzilla's head by using assisted re-entry to hit the target, which should be easy enough while it's stuck in one spot. There's also the idea of a kinetic orbital strike, which involves firing a telephone pole-sized tungsten rod from a satellite, and could be as powerful as a small tactical nuke without the lingering radiation. Now, of course, all of these weapons are only theoretical, or at least that's what they want you to think. If they're holding anything back, then now's the time to break it out, and when all else fails, they could always try flying in King Kong. The survivors are forced to remain underground for several days while they wait for the radiation to clear. To make matters even worse, homeless refugees are expected to be in the millions, and they'll have to undergo a complete government restructure after losing the Prime Minister and his top officials. Kyoko warns the acting Prime Minister that a coalition of nations led by China and Russia have begun pushing to take the situation out of Japan and the US's hands should they fail to get the creature under control. As a response, Yaguchi and the surviving members of his team immediately get back to work on their freeze plan. They have 24 private suppliers working around the clock to produce enough of the coagulant, but unfortunately, progress is difficult now that the entire country is in shambles. Meanwhile, biologists from the US arrive to assist with the research, and a team of military scientists is sent to the attack site to gather biological samples from the creature. They quickly realize that Godzilla has evolved a built-in radar system, which is how it can intercept any approaching bombs and missiles. As a matter of fact, the creature is in a constant state of evolution. Not only can it change size at will, but it has the potential to mutate into just about any form, including growing wings to fly across the ocean, and worst of all, it seems to be attempting to reproduce. Faced with this news, the US decides that this calls for drastic measures. It's time to drop the nuke. Yaguchi insists that his team are on the verge of a breakthrough with their freeze plan, but the other government officials know that they'll lose international support if they drop the ball once again. Faced with an impossible choice, the acting prime minister gives his approval for the US to go ahead with their strike. The citizens of Tokyo will be given a window of a few days to evacuate, but in that time, Yaguchi and his team must fight to make their plan a reality before it's too late. As they scramble to produce and transport the coagulant, scientists predict that Godzilla's energy beam will be fully recharged in as little as 2 weeks. Over 3.6 million citizens are given the order to evacuate the area, fearing that if the creature becomes active any sooner, then the US will strike without concern for collateral damage. After trading information with the freelance journalist, Yaguchi and his team realize that Maki's notes were meant to be folded in the style of origami. They come to the conclusion that Godzilla has an organ inside of its body that's capable of converting decaying heat into limitless energy, raising concerns that the freeze plan might not work after all. With the help of supercomputers, they're finally able to decipher Maki's code, revealing that he'd discovered an inhibitor molecule that, if added to the coagulant, should do the trick. The freeze plan is still on, but unfortunately, they'll need just a bit more time. Okay, Yaguchi here isn't going to agree with me on this one, but maybe it's just time to let the US do its thing. I get what they're going for here, but is the risk really worth it? If their plan doesn't work out, then none of them will be able to evacuate the city in time, and they could end up losing countless lives all for nothing. In the time that it's been taking them to think of an idea that might work, they could all be safely out of harm's way by now, and the citizens of Japan are going to need their leadership when it's time to rebuild. Plus, who's going to say that they won't get jumpy and decide to launch a nuke a few days early? Then they'll all be dead whether the plan would have worked or not. In my opinion, staying to work on the freeze plan is just too risky, and I'd been on the first bus out of this town the instant that I heard that the US was planning to do that. Hopefully, Yaguchi and his team can pull this off before it's too late. Using her political connections, Kyoko risks her career to buy Yaguchi 24 more hours and military support from the US. They're able to get enough coagulant produced just in time, and with everything in order, the special operation can begin. Taking command, Yaguchi assembles a massive team of military personnel and private volunteers, and hits them with a moving speech, reminding them that the future of their entire country is on the line. From his post on the rooftop of the National Science Museum, he gives the order to start. Moments later, 2 bullet trains packed with explosive come hurtling down the tracks and strike Godzilla in its legs, awakening the creature once again. Following the first hit, a squadron of military drones from the US begins dropping bombs over Godzilla's back, baiting it into discharging its concentrated energy beams. Wave after wave of the drones are sent in until Godzilla redistributes its power and begins firing the beams out of its mouth and tail, slicing through everything around it like a hot knife through butter. The surrounding radiation levels increase to a concerning high, but finally, the creature runs out of energy and the energy beams stop. Seeing that it's weakened, Yaguchi initiates Phase 3 of the plan, detonating controlled explosives in the nearby buildings and collapsing them straight onto Godzilla's head. They're literally dropping entire skyscrapers onto it, and it's finally enough to bring the creature down. With Godzilla stunned, a swarm of construction vehicles rushes in, surrounding the creature and spraying the coagulant directly into its mouth, with dozens of truck-mounted cranes. Just when everything is going according to plan, Godzilla's back begins to glow purple, and it emits a beam of atomic energy from its mouth, killing dozens of volunteers in the blink of an eye. Furious, Godzilla rears back up and begins stomping through the city, but they can tell that the coagulant has actually slowed it down. Realizing that this is their last chance, Yaguchi sends in another swarm of train bombs, and the enormous explosion topples the creature once again. More cranes circle in, deploying 80, 90, 100% of the coagulant supply. Now all that they can do is pray. For a moment it looked like the plan worked, only for Godzilla to get back up, crushing the crane in its jaws. Its back begins to glow purple again, and just when it's about to fire its laser, the creature stops in its tracks, suddenly frozen completely solid. According to reports, its body temperature has dropped to -196 degrees. Yaguchi's plan worked. Godzilla is finally dead, or at least close enough to dead that it's no longer a threat. Okay, they may have won the battle, but I wouldn't celebrate just yet. All things considered, this isn't exactly the best outcome. The US is still going to nuke Godzilla the second that it starts moving again. And even if they weren't, who would want to live in a city that's constantly under threat of giant radioactive monsters suddenly coming back to life? There's no reason to get excited about rebuilding under those conditions, so they can't stop here. They need to find a way to kill Godzilla for good, and it's not going to be easy. Maybe more doses of coagulant could keep Godzilla frozen while they figure out a better solution. But how long do they have before it ends up evolving its way around that? The only real solution is to find a way to destroy the creature at a cellular level. Otherwise, it's only a matter of time before it starts to reproduce and take over the entire planet. For all that they know, this was only putting a band-aid on the problem, or could make the situation even worse if Godzilla starts evolving around their strategies again. The truth is that they may just be totally screwed here, and I wouldn't recommend letting their guard down for a second until they were sure that Godzilla was as dead gets. To everyone's relief, Hiromi crunches the numbers and concludes that Godzilla's radioactive fallout should disperse to a safe level in just a few years. In time, Tokyo can rebuild, and its citizens can return to their normal lives, with Yaguchi and his team leading the way as the newly appointed heads of government. The US calls off their strike on the condition that if Godzilla ever becomes active again, then they'll immediately nuke the entire city into oblivion. It's not exactly ideal, but when it comes to international politics, Yaguchi understands that you have to work with what you've got. He thanks Kyoko for all of her help, although they both know that there's still a long road ahead. As Yaguchi looks out on Godzilla's frozen body, he sees what appears to be several humanoid creatures that were frozen in place as they attempted to emerge from its tail, a sign of a possible fifth form if Godzilla should ever rise again. Okay, hold up. Let's say you in Japan and then Godzilla pops out. What the f you gonna do? You gonna stay there and try to figure out how to kill it, or are you gonna get on the first bus out of town? You got a family? Get them the f out of there and let the military figure this shit out. But what would you do? Let us know down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Our incredible team has been hard at work to put together this Shin Godzilla episode, and we really hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe, and check out the How to Beat playlist for other videos just like the one you just watched. I'm pretty sure you'll like them. Having said that, there really is only one thing left to say, and it's have a damn good day.